This book we're talking about today has had more of an impact on my writing than anything else. I won't bury the lead. We are talking about Elements of Style by Strunk and White. This is one of the oldest craft books out there that still gets a lot of attention. The first edition was published in 1935 and it's been updated a few times, but this book is still very relevant to writers today. A lot of the advice presented in here is timeless and very valuable to anyone who writes, whether that's fiction or nonfiction. Even if you only write in a work environment with emails, memos, documents, that sort of thing, it would be worth reading this book. Today, I want to talk about why this book is so valuable, how it can help any writer find their own style, and also some of the ways to use this book, because I don't think this is the kind of book that you just read once and never look at again. I will also level a few criticisms and cautions about this book, as it is great but not perfect, and I think there are some things that are worth mentioning there. Elements of Style is a very short book. It's only that thick. I think it's like 100 pages total. And it's not even a book that's necessarily geared towards writing fiction. It does not go into detail about plot or characters or descriptions, though it's still of great use to fiction writers. What I think Elements of Style does really well is bridge the gap between basic grammar and syntax rules, and it really works to describe a method to crafting concise, effective prose. The book mainly contains examples of specific rules along with explanations for why you should follow those rules. And these rules either relate to basic grammar and usage or to more complex elements of what goes into effective writing. For instance, this is under the Approach to Style section, and it says, write with nouns and verbs, not with adjectives and adverbs. The adjective hasn't been built that can pull a weak or inaccurate noun out of a tight place. So the book is mainly a list of rules that every writer should follow, but what emerges out of those rules is an approach to writing, an approach that emphasizes strength and clarity over decadence and complexity. And I think that's the more important thing that you should take away from this book. It's not necessarily about the specific rules, but it's rather the approach and the attitude that following those rules will create in your writing. Sure, applying all of the rules presented in this book will help your writing, but adopting the mindset towards writing that the authors have outlined through the text is much more valuable. What is described here is how to build the foundation of your voice, the bedrock on which your own unique style will be crafted. I mean, they put that right in the title. A lot of writers, myself included at various times, believe that finding style means using a dialect or being particularly flowery or having a penchant for complex but ugly words. What Strunk and White emphasize is that style emerges out of a forceful application of solid writing, that your style is as much about peeling away obstacles as it is about adding flourishes. A style emerges out of clarity, out of a bridge between you and the reader. Your voice will arise naturally from your writing once you remove everything that you think is your voice. I mentioned at the beginning that the best way to use this book is not to read it cover to cover. I mean, you can read it cover to cover. It's fairly short. But I think using this as a reference is a much more valuable way to use it. I think that will be much more useful than just reading it once cover to cover. For instance, there's a section called Elementary Principles of Composition that I think contains 12 or so areas that you can look at in your writing. If you, for instance, read through your work with an eye to applying one or two of those principles, you may find something that improves it. This is the sort of book that you should be actively using as part of your writing practice, not just something you read and put down forever. It's short enough not to be cumbersome when used like that, and I think that's probably what the authors intended. Now, this book is not without its critics, although there are a lot of famous authors who really like this book. A lot of people have pointed out issues with some of its advice. I would say that everything in here is sound advice, and most writers will benefit from application of this advice, but that's not to say that you should blindly follow it. First up, a lot of the principles in here are geared as absolute solid rules. Now, as someone who peddles writing advice on a regular basis, I can empathize with the authors here. The fact is that presenting advice in this way, in sort of an absolutist kind of way, is the easiest and most concise way to present it. Qualifying something as not absolute is difficult, it weakens your argument, and I think it can be confusing to the person trying to absorb the advice because a lot of people are just looking for specific things that they should do. Some of the advice in here, though, I think is absolutely absolute, like making it clear who is speaking in dialogue. I don't know how you could disagree that that's a bad thing or a good thing. But some of the advice around things like not using fancy words doesn't always apply, especially in fiction. For instance, I have a character who speaks in a sort of ostentatious way because they desperately want to impress people. So in that character's voice, in their viewpoint, the language is perhaps more garish than it ought to be, and that's probably fine because I'm using that to convey something about the character. I'm using it for the purposes of characterization. Like anything else, knowing the rules is an important step if you want to break those rules. Another quibble that I have here is this is an old book, and I think some of its rules are kind of out of date and conventions have kind of changed perhaps a little bit since this came out. It has been updated, and I think a lot of the obviously archaic stuff has been removed, but there's a handful of things in here that make me scratch my head. Like it mentions forming the possessive singular of nouns by adding apostrophe s. So when you have the cat's food, you put apostrophe s to signify that it's a possessive. But it mentions that you should follow this rule regardless of what the final consonant is. So Charles's friend should be Charles apostrophe s friend to indicate the possessive. I was always taught, and my understanding was when the last consonant of the noun is an s, you put the apostrophe after the s, and that's how you signify a possessive when the last consonant of the noun is an s. But this book tells you to do that differently. All criticisms aside, this is still a fantastic resource for any writer, so I highly recommend you give it a try. Just like you gave this video a try by watching it until the end. So there you have it. I'd love to hear what you think about this in the comments down below and what you think of Elements of Style or any other craft book that has had an impact on your writing. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.